In 218 BC, a nightmare crossed the Alps and descended into Italy. His name was Hannibal Barca, and he had sworn a blood oath to destroy the Roman Republic. After two devastating defeats at the Trebia and Lake Trasimene, Rome was in a state of absolute panic. The Senate decided they could no longer play a game of cat and mouse. They needed a decisive, crushing victory. To guarantee the annihilation of Hannibal, Rome raised the largest army in its history. Over 80,000 heavily armed legionaries marched south. Their destination was a dry, dusty supply depot in Apulia, a place called Cannae. Led by two consuls, the Romans were blindly confident. But Hannibal was already waiting for them. He had carefully chosen this exact battlefield, and the Romans were walking right into his masterpiece. The date was August 2nd, 216 BC. The greatest bloodbath in the ancient world was about to begin. The Roman consul Varro commanded the army that day. His plan was brutally simple. Knowing he had a massive numerical advantage, he packed his 80,000 men into an incredibly deep, dense block. He intended to use this giant human battering ram to smash straight through the center of Hannibal's army. Across the dusty plain, Hannibal commanded a much smaller force of about 50,000 men, but he deployed them in a bizarre formation. He bowed his center outwards, creating a massive crescent. In the bulging center, he placed his most unreliable troops, the Celts and Iberians. But on the extreme left and right edges of his line, he placed his elite, battle-hardened African veterans, hidden in the dust. Hannibal also used the environment. The hot wind, known as the Vulturnus, blew harsh dust directly into the eyes of the Romans. On his flanks, he positioned his devastating heavy cavalry and the lightning-fast Numidians. The Romans looked at the thin, bulging Carthaginian center and saw an easy target. To make sure his weak center wouldn't break immediately, Hannibal placed himself right on the front line with them. The trap was set. All he needed now was for the Romans to charge. The Roman war machine surged forward, a tidal wave of bronze and iron kicking up the hot summer dust. They smashed into the bulging Carthaginian center with deafening force. Hannibal was right there in the blood and the dust. He ordered his men to fight, but to slowly step back, to yield, but never break. The Romans felt the enemy giving way. Thinking victory was near, they pushed deeper and deeper into the center. But while the Roman infantry pushed forward, on the flanks, a different battle was happening. Hannibal's heavy cavalry utterly obliterated the Roman horsemen, driving them entirely off the battlefield. Back in the center, the Roman infantry realized something was wrong. They had pushed so deep, they were now wedged in a V-shape. They were packed so tightly, thousands of men couldn't even raise their arms to draw their swords. And on their left and right stood Hannibal's untouched African veterans. Hannibal gave the signal. The African infantry turned inward, like giant doors swinging shut, driving their spears directly into the unprotected flanks of the Roman army. The Romans were completely blinded by the dust and paralyzed by their own numbers. And then, the final nail in the coffin, Hannibal's cavalry returned, slamming into the rear of the Roman army. The encirclement was complete. 80,000 Romans were trapped in a circle of death. The The pressure inside the pocket was unimaginable. Men suffocated in the dust before a sword even touched them. The Carthaginians didn't rush. They methodically tightened the circle, butchering the outer edges inch by inch. For hours, the Romans in the center could do nothing but listen to the screams getting closer and wait their turn. Consul Paulus, severely wounded, refused a horse to escape. He sat on a rock and died with his men. The pride of the Republic was completely shattered. By sunset, the slaughter finally stopped. Not because the Romans surrendered, but because the Carthaginians were simply too exhausted to kill anymore. In a single afternoon, Hannibal had annihilated over 50,000 Roman soldiers. It remains one of the most lethal single days of combat in human history. He collected a bushel of gold rings from the fingers of dead Roman nobles, sending them back to Carthage as proof of his impossible victory. Rome was left completely defenseless. The Republic was on the absolute brink of destruction. When the news reached Rome, the city froze in absolute terror. Almost every family had lost a son, a father, or a brother. Over 80 Roman senators had died in the dust of Cannae. The leadership of the Republic was decimated. Hannibal's cavalry commander, Hannibal, urged him to march on Rome immediately, but Hannibal refused, knowing he lacked the siege equipment to take the massive city. Hannibal famously told him, "You know how to win a victory, Hannibal, but you do not know how to use it." But among the few Roman survivors was a young man named Publius Cornelius Scipio. He had watched Hannibal's tactics firsthand. He didn't break, he learned. Hannibal had delivered the perfect tactical victory, but Rome didn't surrender. Rome adapted.